Excellent speakers. First off, I'm delighted to welcome Kate Farmer. Kate is a policy advisor in the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, in their abstraction and water efficiency team. Before joining the department, she served as a project officer, research officer in the Government Office for Science, and has also been a surf instructor, LinkedIn profile tells me. Kate, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. I wasn't expecting the reference back to surfing, I have to say. Thanks very much for inviting me to attend the slot. And it looks like you've got a really interesting day of talks ahead of you. I was going to introduce myself, but Tom's done it already. So would you mind moving to slide 2? So today I'm hoping to talk you through a bit of background as to why the government has been taking action on water efficiency, the subsequent regulatory and policy framework, and then the next steps we've been planning sort of as a government. So slide 3, please. So if any of you attended the WaterWise conference earlier this year, you'll have seen Minister Powell, the Environment Minister, mention that we see water efficiency as a really important part of the climate emergency. So there's been various reports which I've shown on the side of the screen there, showing that there's going to be a future deficit in our water resources for public supply. So there's the National Infrastructure Commission report there, and then, various reports from the Committee on Climate Change, but I've only put one there. So at the moment, the public supply deficit looks to be around 3,300 million litres per day by 2050, which obviously is quite significant. And we've also seen some of the impacts of climate change in recent year from the 2018 year-on-year drought, and also extreme weather from flooding as well. So we've seen both sides. So the point I'm trying to make on this slide is that we really need to take a twin track approach to both increase our supply options and to reduce water demand to meet this deficit in water. So I think it was the National Infrastructure Commission who suggested the demand reduction should make up 2/3 of the deficit, and then supply options or new supply options the other third. So by new supply options, I mean sort of new infrastructure such as reservoirs, and then also transfers between water companies. And as I'm sure everyone probably knows, with demand I mean fixing leakage and reducing the amount we use personally, but also in businesses as well. If you wouldn't mind going on to slide 4, please. Thank you. So in this slide, I've put together quite a few bubbles to try and set out what the government's doing to achieve its ambition on water demand. So it's sort of overarching at the top in a nice DEFRA green. We have the 25-year environment plan, which we published in 2018. And as I'm sure many of you know, this set out our sort of overarching ambition to achieve clean and plentiful water. And it also sets out, sort of under this, our commitment to take actions to improve our supply resilience and also to incentivise water efficiency. And in the plan, we also commit to work with industry to set a personal water consumption target. So sitting underneath the green bubble there, I've got sort of the various actions we've been taking, a lot through working closely with water companies to sort of stimulate reduced household water use and to reduce leakage. So I think the main one to say first is the sort of the 2019 water resource management plans, which is our sort of regulatory review, or the plans that water companies submit to us to forecast the demand and supply options over the next 25 years. And in the 2019 versions of these plans, water companies committed to reduce the average water use per person to 120 litres per person per day by 2044 and 2045. But they also committed to maintaining their to reducing leakage by 50% by 2050, which we endorsed in some of our reporting structures as well. So as well as the water company water resource management plans, we've also now got regional water resource plans, which are the first ones are due to be published in 2023, and we set out the need for regional planning, or actually more correctly, the Environment Agency set out the need for regional planning in the National Framework for Water Resources in March 2020 this year. And I think the idea behind moving to sort of regional groups of water companies and also other sort of stakeholders is so that water supply planning can be more strategic and account for sort of those cross-sectoral linkages, and also look at sort of the localised issues in areas. And I think it's quite important to mention that in the national framework, all these regional groups will be working towards an assumption of achieving 110 litres per person per day. And that's a baseline set without sort of with the idea that no further government action has been taken, and that can be achieved, and that this process will also involve an advisory group for demand management as well. So yeah, quite significantly involved in sort of the water company planning side. And then also to quickly mention, water company planning is of course underpinned by the price review, and that's a 5-yearly process where Ofwat determines the price and service packages that customers will receive. So we've also got a number of targets through that, which are due for 2025 from 2019, and that's sort of 131 litres per person per day target and a 16% leakage reduction. Sorry, there's a lot of targets I've thrown at you there. So to complement the water company side, we also have measures we're taking through the Environment Bill, which is in Parliament sort of at the moment, but postponed due to COVID. And there's a few measures in there on abstraction and sort of compensation sort of rights run by the Environment Agency. But also in the Environment Bill, there's proposals for a demand target, which would be a wider demand target sitting above sort of personal water use or household water use, non-household water use and leakage. And on the next slide, I'll show a policy paper that recently came out about that, and I'll speak a bit more about that in a second. And then finally, there's all the work going on the retail market and non-household water use. So, as you know, the retail market was set up in 2017, and that's with the idea that retail water companies will compete for business customers and reduce or increase the water efficiency in the non-household sector. And while there has been progress in doing that, we do recognise the need that there is a need to do more to increase sort of the water efficiencies through that route. So if you mind going to slide 5, please, Tom. So this is a bit of a quick overview or a canter through sort of the next steps we're planning in government to sort of increase water efficiency. And we know there's a lot more that could be done. And if anyone's seen the recent Public Accounts Committee report, that will also give a bit more detail on that. So I've split it up by household and non-household again. But to focus on household first, as I'm sure many of you listening are aware, we did a consultation in 2019 on measures to reduce personal water use, with the idea that this would inform sort of any target through the 25-year environment plan. And we consulted on 8 measures that ranged from water efficiency labelling to changes to building regulations, supply pipe leakage and communications, amongst others. And we received a lot of feedback, over 300 responses to that consultation. And if any of you did respond, thank you very much for that. And to give a sneak peek into sort of the responses, we've received fairly strong support for a lot of the policy proposals contained within the consultation. And I think the views really reiterated the need for sort of widespread action from both government, water companies and organisations. So I'm afraid I can't give much of an update on that, other than that we will publish our response to the views given in late 2020, and I apologise for the delay on this, partly due to COVID. And yes, thanks to everyone who chose to participate. I've also got under the household side there, which I think is slightly wrong, is that we're exploring a statutory demand target through proposals in the Environment Bill, and the policy paper is on the right there of your screen. So I don't think this should be in household because it's suggesting a wider demand target, as I said, to sit above any household target, non-household and leakage target. But the idea of this target is that it would be, well, to go back to the provision in the Environment Bill. So the Environment Bill says that we can make statutory targets for priority areas that are set in the 25-year environment plan. And this includes clean and plentiful water, and that these targets have to be subject to regular review and progress updates, and they need to be smart and not duplicate anything that exists already. So at the moment, over the last few months, DEFRA have been developing proposals for what those targets could contain, and one of those targets for water would be this demand target, as I said, sitting above the others. So we're still at very early stages of the target, but I think it's important to mention that the onus of it would be a target designed for water companies, looking at water put into, at the moment proposing looking at water put into supply. However, it's important to raise that the target would be statutory, and ultimately the Secretary of State would be reporting on delivery in Parliament for this target. So to give an idea of sort of the next steps, and these are all contained in that policy paper, we're in the stage of developing the scope and the evidence until autumn 2021, and then there'll be a public consultation on the targets, and the intention is that these targets are finalised by autumn 2022. So that's the household and not above household section. But we're also, another part of the team is carrying out quite a lot of work on the non-household sector. So just to quickly mention that in March 2020, we worked with Ofwat and the A so that they could issue a joint letter to wholesale and retail water company CEOs, and this called for greater work to deliver water efficiency through the business sector. And I think the letter specifically requested sort of more collaboration with WRMPs, so water resource management planning, better use of water consumption data, and then better coordination with regard to sort of unplanned events such as drought. And sorry, that's the phone. And after that, the retailer wholesaler group was tasked with developing a joint action plan and set up a subgroup. And over the past 7 months, I've been developing sort of the action that the retailers will take. And I think this plan was consulted on with stakeholders and hopefully some of you over the summer, and the plan's looking to be finalised this autumn. So those are the actions going on the non-household side. So that, Tom, was my brief canter through what's going on in government, and I hope that's been helpful. I'm aware I've probably come in a bit under time. But of course I think I had a few questions to ask on Slido for when you think is appropriate. And thank you very much for inviting me to present.
Thank you, Kate. That was a really interesting presentation, and we are going to return to some of the questions which you have to ask our members at the end of the session in the Q&A. And as you said, we've got some Slido poll questions to provide some really fresh data for Kate as an outcome of this morning's session. I mean, from my point of view, it was good to see that actually there is a focus on demand on supply as well as demand. Be quite keen when we return to the Q&A to explore whether there's actually going to be some supply targets as well as demand side targets, because it does feel a little like being in the trenches at the moment with regard to supply, the demand side of things and domestic consumption. Moving on, thank you very much again, Kate. I'm pleased to welcome Rob Allen from Policy Connect. Policy Connect is a membership-based organisation, a not-for-profit think tank that works cross-party on policy. Policy Connect brings together parliamentarians and the government in collaboration with academia, business and civil society to inform, influence and improve UK public policy making. Rob draws on a decade of experience in environmental consultancy and has led the production of the Bricks and Water report, which is due out soon, and which I think we're going to have a sneak peek of. Rob.
Thanks very much, Tom. I'll just take control here of the slides and move us on. So yeah, good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for inviting me on this morning. As Tom mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about our forthcoming report, Bricks and Water, and specifically sort of the water efficiency aspects of that work. So I think sort of Tom has mentioned this, but Policy Connect's a cross-party think tank. We're in our 26th year now, and we aim, as you said, to inform, influence and improve UK public policy. We bring together parliamentarians, we publish research reports, of which Bricks and Water is one, and we bring together wider stakeholders across Westminster, Whitehall, business and academia, and we're a not-for-profit social enterprise. So just a little bit about the sustainability team where I work. We run a number of policy forums and all-party parliamentary groups. We run the Climate Change and Sustainable Resource APPGs, and also the Sustainable Resource Forum and the Carbon Connect Policy Forum. So this was Greta Thunberg speaking at an event the Climate Change APPG ran last year. This was back in the good old days when seeing a room packed to the rafters full of people was actually a good thing. I run the Westminster Sustainable Business Forum, and we're a group of parliamentarians, businesses, academics who work collaboratively on sustainability policy in the built environment. And over the last few years, we've been focusing on water. So this was actually our first Bricks and Water inquiry, which we launched back in 2018, which explored water and house building. It was co-chaired by Angela Smith and Baroness McIntosh of Pickering. The work was cited in the Committee on Climate Change's report, I think last year, on housing. And it basically explored how, if the government is going to meet this ambitious house building target of 300,000 new homes per year, how are we going to ensure that these homes are built sustainably and essentially are going to be habitable come the end of this century. So just some of the recommendations in that report, we were looking and advocating for a tougher, simpler planning framework to sort of level the playing field for developers and help to bring everyone up to the same high standards. We're advocating for powers for the forthcoming Office for Environmental Protection as the new regulator there. We wanted to see water issues addressed at the catchment scale rather than maybe the narrower local planning authority level, because we recognise that, you know, especially things like flooding don't respect local planning authority boundaries. We wanted to see better water efficiency in new development, and also making the use of sustainable drainage systems the norm rather than the exception. We wanted to see more incentives for land managers, especially things like natural flood management techniques to manage the quality of water and the quantity of water as it moves through the catchment. And finally, we thought a lot about sort of how we improve the resilience of our homes to a changing climate. So that kind of set the framework for the inquiry, this follow-up inquiry that we've been working on over the last year. And we really wanted to build on those recommendations, specifically those with regard to resilience of our homes to climate change. So following some scoping work, we identified that we wanted to focus on three main topics of water efficiency, property flood resilience and sustainable drainage. I appreciate that the efficiency side of things will probably be of most interest to people in attendance today, so I will focus on that. But just to say, if you are interested in those other aspects, we're launching this report on the 20th of October by webinar, so please do reach out to me and I can drop you an invite if you're interested in that. As part of the evidence gathering process, we held 4 roundtables in Parliament and online. These were chaired by parliamentarians, including Baroness Mackintosh, but also the Shadow Environment Secretary Luke Pollard and the then Shadow Flooding Minister Ruth Jones. We ran a call for evidence and conducted over 20 interviews with expert stakeholders. And finally, we wanted to use that evidence that we've gathered as part of this process to develop a sort of practical set of tools by which a homeowner or a tenant can measure what we call the water performance of the dwelling. And I'll come on to speak a little bit more about that. So our starting point really for water efficiency, and I'm covering some of the points that Kate's already mentioned here, but essentially wanted to try and avoid the jaws of death, which was how the Environment Agency Chief Exec James Bevan put it at last year's WaterWise conference, and when he was talking about this converging graph between water demand going up due to population growth and available supply going down due to hotter summers and climate change trends, and this projection that we could essentially run out of water by the middle of this century. Again, as Kate's mentioned, we appreciate that there are a number of factors that impact the amount of water that gets abstracted from the environment, including non-domestic use and losses from water company supply pipe work. And we welcome that work that DEFRA have been doing on an overall demand target under the framework of the Environment Bill. However, this piece of work, we wanted to consider consumption at the property level and how we can reduce personal consumption that's been rising in recent years up to around 143 litres per person per day, where it stands today. We acknowledge that the pandemic has had an impact on this, and water companies, our members, have told us that from their smart meter data, they've seen, personal consumption going up during this period, as you might well imagine, and non-domestic and commercial use going down. So that really makes it all the more challenging as to how we're going to get personal consumption down to around 100 litres per person per day in the first instance, which was one of our recommendations that we made in that first Bricks and Mortar report. So how are we going to achieve all this? Well, these are some of our findings. I should say this is pretty hot off the press. Our report isn't actually launched yet, so this is a little sort of look behind the curtain on what we're trying to advocate for. I think the main thing is working together is going to be really, really important. And with that in mind, we've made some recommendations for not only government, but also water companies, house builders and consumers. We recommended that DEFRA set a national per capita consumption target, which I know is something they've already committed to do under the 25-year environment plan. We recommended introduction of a mandatory water label for all fixtures, fittings and water using products. Now, from my conversations with Tom, I know that the BMA and many of its members may have a difference in opinion from us on this. However, the feedback that we received from stakeholders, particularly house builders, was they felt that a mandatory option would give them much more certainty, would help to give confidence to the industry and help to feed that confidence down through the supply chains, and so they're not sort of at risk of being undercut by their competitors or maybe people who are sort of going for a less sort of sustainable approach. Thirdly, we will recommend reform of Part G of building regulations to remove the water efficiency calculator and move to a fittings-based approach only, which should be underpinned by that mandatory water label that we just mentioned. And we recommend that minimum product standards should be set to achieve 100 litres per person per day in the first instance, which we, I appreciate is quite ambitious. We recommended acceleration of metering programs beyond that allocated in current water resource management plans. And then on leakage reduction, we recommended that many parties have a role to play. I know this is really timely this week after the stuff in the press and Tuesday's Costing the Earth episode, but we've recommended higher standards for some of those fixtures and fittings, and I'm sure everyone here is well aware of the stigma around leaky loos. But we also recommend that everyone has a part to play here, especially installers and house builders, to make sure that these things are installed correctly, and also the public to ensure that people know how to do the straightforward maintenance of these things to keep them working in the way in which they were designed. We've recommended that new development builds in rainwater harvesting and grey water recycling options where practical, especially at the development scale where sort of runoff and black water can be collected and treated locally for reuse. We've seen a number of examples where new technology can help with this. For example, I think sort of early rainwater harvesting systems were criticised because they ended up being full quite a lot of the time and were therefore ineffective. But we're seeing new examples where smart systems are using technology much better to use Met Office forecasting data, for example, to empty into the surface water sewer at the appropriate time, so they're effective sort of throughout the year. We've highlighted the concept of water neutrality for new development. So when new demand from new homes can be offset by making existing homes more efficient through maybe fixtures and fittings retrofit, but also in-home efficiency audits run by water companies. We've recommended that these principles should be put at the heart of major new development, such as the Oxford to Cambridge Arc. Finally, probably most importantly, we've recommended that bringing consumers with us on this journey is going to be really, really important. Water using behaviours are such a big part of this. No matter how efficient you make taps and showers, if these things are running all day, people are going to use a lot of water. So we acknowledge that behavioural change campaigns have maybe lacked funding over the last few years, and it's really important that we emphasise this link between saving water, saving energy and saving money. So new homes, however, are only a small part of this problem. The majority of houses that will be standing in 2050 have already been built, and so we must find a way to try and improve the water efficiency of the 20 million odd homes that are already in place across the UK. And we felt that measuring and communicating the water performance of buildings when they're constructed, when they're sold or when they're rented is really crucial if developers, landlords and owners are going to have the information that they need to take decisions to make their properties water efficient and also resilient to flooding. We've therefore recommended that the existing energy performance certificate can be extended to cover water efficiency. We see this as a good fit because, of course, there's this link between using water and using energy, especially for heating and for heating water for cooking and bathing. And work with energy performance certificates providers has shown that this could be sort of easily incorporated in the standard assessment procedure that underpins that EPC, that it could be delivered using existing domestic energy assessors, and it could be sort of rolled out initially as a sort of bolt-on to the EPC. So I won't go into too much detail here because a lot of this is in the report, but sort of just to say that we would envision that higher credit scores as part of this sort of certificate would be associated with obviously lower consumption targets, and maybe this you could get to maybe this really ambitious level of 100 litres per person per day with water efficient fixtures and fittings and maybe some behaviour change. And then as you layer on these other things that we've been talking about, metering, rainwater harvesting, grey water recycling, we can really try and get that down to maybe the 85 litres per person per day, hopefully by the middle of this century. Finally, sort of what are we, we're a think tank, what are we trying to sort of influence here? First of all, that per capita consumption target under the 25-year environment plan we see is really important, as I mentioned before, but also to sit, again, as Kate mentioned, as part of a sort of a wider target under the framework of the Environment Bill, taking into account leakage and non-domestic use. Again, as Kate mentioned, we fed into DEFRA's consultation on reducing personal water use, and we're really keen to see sort of the outcome of that later in the year. And then to close, really, I think it would be a huge missed opportunity if a lot of these issues, not only water efficiency, but also property flood resilience and incorporating green infrastructure and sustainable drainage into new development, were not included in the scope for the Future Home Standard due to come in 2025, and we feel like these things should really be put on an equal footing with decarbonisation and energy efficiency that goes along with that. So that's it for me. And then just to say, yeah, if you are interested in that forthcoming report launch, we'll be going over a lot of this stuff in more detail and bringing in those aspects of flooding and sustainable drainage. Please do get in touch. But thanks very much.
Rob, thank you very much for that presentation. I know it's triggered a lot of questions in my mind and certainly on the meeting chat as well. If I could ask everyone to keep your questions and your points coming in via the meeting chat, and you can actually use the little thumbs up on each comment to vote up or questions. So I will come to the questions with the most thumbs up first when we get there. But first of all, if I could ask everyone to use their smartphones, or if you're lucky enough to have a second screen, to go to slido.com and enter the code 13497. That will take you to a series of polls which we're running today, and this is to give some instant feedback from our sector to Kate. So I've just put the first poll live now. How far do you agree that a requirement for a water efficiency label on water using products will be effective to reduce household water use? And there's a series of options. I could ask everyone on the call to submit your votes. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. While everyone's voting, I'm going to come. Well, actually, I'm going to use chair's privilege and ask a question which I had first off, and this I think is first to go to Rob, really, as you mentioned the kind of the aspiration of an 80 to 100 litre per person per day target. Has any consideration in the policy development work that the Westminster Sustainable Business Forum's done been given to the potential for stagnation at that level? So obviously the drainage infrastructure which we have in the UK at the moment requires a certain amount of water to go through it to make sure that sewerage is taken away from properties in an effective way. And I think there's a feeling of concern that at those very, very low levels, we could have a problem that creates a whole load of public health risks. Any thoughts on that, Rob?
Yeah, it was certainly something that was raised as part of that evidence gathering kind of process, the issues around having a sort of baseline amount of flow going through the system. Also, sort of more widely, just the sort of, I guess, the yuck factor, what we called it, about, sort of reusing water and sort of trying to get people on board with a lot of these things. I think, yeah, to get to those really low levels, you start having to layer up a number of these different techniques. And I think that we excel at acknowledge that is quite ambitious. But yeah, I guess in direct answer to your question, we haven't looked sort of a huge amount into the sort of detailed practicalities of how, once you start getting to those really low levels, what that might look like, other than to say, I think, there are some schemes coming forward. There's a place just down the road from where I am in Cambridge that has sort of got a development scale sort of rainwater harvesting and grey water reuse system in place that seems to work quite well. I have to say, I don't know exactly what levels of PCC they're achieving with that, but yeah, it's something that we acknowledge that we would need to take into account.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Just going to move on, if everyone's still on Slido, onto our next poll, which is how far do you agree that amending building regulations so that new builds must be more efficient will be effective in reducing household water use? If I can ask everyone to submit your votes on that second poll. Okay, while everyone is completing their answers there, I'm going to actually ask Chris, you've put a lot of questions in the meeting chat. Some really good points there. I'm going to ask you to chip in verbally at this point, if that's okay. Chris Taylor Hamlin.
Sure. In terms of which point do you want me to chip in on, Tom?
Oh, feel free to run through a cross section of them.
Okay, the first one that really does occur to me is we hear a lot of people talking about water efficiency, reducing targets, and how things are going to have to be or should be. And my obvious first question to everybody that talks about this is, what do you do yourself? What's your personal habits? What are you doing? Do you understand what a lower flow rate is when you're showering, for instance? And for me, without that personal understanding, it's difficult to actually quantify the meaningfulness of what you are talking about. So I don't know if Rob's got a comment about that.
Yeah, well, I have to say, after Tuesday's episode of Costing the Earth, my wife found me with my head in the toilet cistern, poking around in there to have a look at the cleanliness of my bowel. So I guess raising awareness of a lot of this stuff is really important, and we kind of recognise that water use is not really on a par with kind of energy use in terms of consumer awareness. People sort of generally sort of tend to understand, how much energy they use. They're switching providers a lot. They're sort of familiar with, kilowatt hours and things like that, and go and have a look at their meter. But with water consumption, that's just sort of not the case at all. And I have to confess, I don't know what my own per capita consumption target is. I sort of, at the beginning of this process, I sort of had a stab at working it out, but it's really difficult. And I think a big part of it, as I mentioned, is sort of trying to sort of raise a lot of this stuff up the agenda and sort of getting sort of campaigns around water saving behaviours up the agenda, and not just have it be, really many people's contact with their water companies is sort of once a year when the bill comes through the post, have a quick look at it, and it goes in the bin. So I think, yeah, maybe a lot of that is about sort of raising awareness and trying to change those behaviours.
Just as a sort of like a comeback on that, Rob, I've been involved in this industry for 20 years. Most of that along that line has been involved in some greater or lesser degree with water efficiency, indeed the water label itself and so on. And many people on this call will know my background. I have constantly come up against people that tell us to use less water, yet don't understand how much they use or what their shower flow rate is or how long they take in the shower. And for us as manufacturers that have to face the wrath of our customers with so-called performing products, that's a bitter pill to swallow when it's people that are uneducated about the true effects of what's going on, telling us what we should be doing for our sector. That's contrary to often what our customers want. That's difficult.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think, what we're maybe trying to advocate for with the water label is sort of simplifying a lot of things. I must say, I don't know what my shower flow rate is, but, I know that I need to reduce my personal consumption. And, a few months ago, I went to the shop and bought a new tumble dryer, and the guy said, didn't really discuss brands or anything like that. He just said, look at the energy label on this one, look at the energy label on that one, how much tumble drying are you going to be doing, and you can make a decision about which one's the best product for you. And so we'd like to see a similar sort of thing with water efficiency. The consumer wouldn't necessarily need to have a detailed understanding about flow rates. They just need to have a very sort of simple, customer facing label that could allow them to make sort of quick decisions at the point of sale.
Sorry, I realise I'm sort of monopolising this a little bit.
Yeah,
I'm going to ask dangerous.
I'm going to ask for this to be your last point, Chris, because we've got a third poll and several other questions.
The one significant point with regard to that is when you look at the energy labels and look at dishwashers or washing machines, the energy label relates to a specific setting, and actually most people don't use that setting. When we're talking about showers or taps, we don't have those other settings. So the label relates to only what you're ever going to get. You don't have the option to change what you're getting out, to move to a different setting. And that creates a very different sort of concept of what our products are doing and how our customers receive them and receive the water from those products.
Thank you, Chris. Just before I invite Rob to come back there, can I ask everyone to have a look at Slido again for our third question, which is when do you think changes in both water labelling and building regulations will need to be implemented to be most effective for reducing household water use? If I could ask you just to bear in mind as well what it means as a fixture and fitting manufacturer to actually adapt to any new regulatory framework as well. So that should feature in your answer. While we're waiting for those results to come in, can I ask Colin Sefton to put your couple of questions and your point about your slight scepticism around labelling, please, Colin?
Yes, hopefully you can hear me here. So yes, well, I'm quite new to this, although interested. I noticed Kate, if I understood correctly, Kate was talking about a target of 120 litres by 2044, and Rob was talking about a long-term target of less than 80 litres per minute. And I think my thought is, are DEFRA being far too unoptimistic here? I don't know. I know it's coming from a slightly different angle, but that was point one. And then point two, I think, is I'm sort of sceptical. I think the big challenge here is changing consumer behaviour, which is always difficult. And I think my perception is in things, it's all very well putting a label on it, but if people use it differently, that doesn't really work, does it? It's like, I didn't use it in this example, but cars is a classic one, isn't it? They publish these wonderful, miles per gallon or whatever figures. And people, and I'm certainly guilty of this, I completely ignore that and I drive as fast as I can and don't really care what the fuel economy is. And I'm actually pro-environment, to be honest. So yeah, I think I'm sure that's being thought about, but I think that's the really big challenge here is whether it can change behaviour. And what Chris said a little bit covered it in terms of what he was saying a few minutes ago.
Thank you, Colin. Kate, I'll give you the right reply there on DEFRA's ambition.
Yeah, thanks very much for your question. So I've probably sown confusion by there being so many sort of various demand related targets. So the 120 litres per person per day is the target that water companies have aimed for in their 2019 water resource management plans. So that isn't a target sort of set by DEFRA, it's one that's sort of agreed with water companies. But we, in the 25-year environment plan, we did say we would set a sort of personal use target, and that sort of wrapped up in the consultation in 2019. So we haven't actually sort of set any target yet. And then we're also looking at the sort of wider demand target, which would sit above a household use target through the environment build process. But it's still very early days for that. So DEFRA doesn't actually have its own sort of target at the moment, but it's something we are developing. Hopefully that answers the first one. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And I know you're kind of surely going to be taking notes and absorbing all of this information that's coming out in the discussion, which is really great. I'm going to ask Martin Walker to make his point around experience, obviously from an Australian parent company. You've got some experience that you want to share.
Yeah, hi guys. It was just a quick question, really, I guess, directed at Rob with the think tank. So as Tom said, we have an Australian parent, and in Australia they have, particularly in the commercial world, a system called Neighbours. So if you're looking at an office block that's for sale, it would basically have a rating based on its energy and water consumption, and therefore then they get significant financial incentives if the building energy is lower, or energy and water is lower. And even if you were looking at an office building, it would have firstly the energy rating, the water label, then it would say to let, and then it would have the phone number of the estate agent. Yet we don't seem to have anything like that. And I guess one of those things would really help awareness, consumer awareness, because every office building that has a to let sign shows the water rating. I just wonder whether you've looked at anything like that from overseas.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. I mean, that's actually when we set out at the beginning of this work, we were looking at maybe a sort of independent, what we were calling a sort of property resilience certificate in of itself. So maybe something similar to what you're describing, which could look at energy, water, and a variety of other factors, which could sort of stand alone as a document. We kind of as part of this work, we're always trying to sort of take the the temperature of the political kind of landscape, and we sort of looked at the current climate. Obviously, we don't want to sort of layer on more red tape, and the government is consulting at the moment. There's a white paper on planning reform where they're looking at sort of cutting red tape and simplifying things. So we sort of moved away from sort of an independent certificate like that, just because we felt if this would be more sort of palatable for maybe sort of government to take up. But it is a really interesting thing to look at. And we've also looked at, I know there's some work going on around the Committee on Climate Change and the Green Finance Task Force had looked at things like green building passports, sort of digital passports for buildings, which could include a lot of that sort of wider information for the sales or letting process. So that's another area that we're looking at as well.
Thank you, Rob. Mick Moran, I think, makes an excellent point. I'm going to bring him in around market surveillance, Mick. See, I think Mick must be having some problems unmuting. So I'm going to make put the point on his behalf, where he says, do plans to tighten regulations include increased policing of products in the market? Just for Kate's benefit, the existing rule set around water fittings, unfortunately, there are products available in the marketplace that don't adhere to, not from BMA members, I hasten to add, but don't comply with the current rule set. So if things are getting tighter, is that going to be matched by policing? I think an excellent question. Kate.
Hi, so that's a really interesting point, thank you. And it's something we're definitely sort of exploring or are keen to explore as part of our consultation. And I'm afraid I don't have a firm answer for you. I know that on the energy efficiency side, products are sort of enforced through the office. I think for product standards is the right term. But I agree, it's definitely something we'd need to consider if we did decide to take any sort of policies in that area forward. Sorry, that's not a very satisfactory answer.
It's something which obviously we've included in our consultation responses, and yes, I'd also kind of make the point that there's been some pretty large changes in regulation in the past that has produced some unintended and unwelcome consequences, both for the industry and to our general kind of aspirations, not just on water efficiency, but on good regulation in this area. So I think any changes really do have to be led by evidence and by data, and if research needs to be conducted to fill the gaps there, we strongly support that's done before any changes to the law are made. I'm going to ask Henrik Andersson from Aguardio, who are actually BMA's latest affiliate member, just recently joined. Henrik, do you want to make the point around kind of some of the technology coming to market at the moment?
Yes, Aguardio has developed a technology through the past 3 years. It's evolving around motivating people to take shorter showers. They simply put a clock with sensors in your bathroom. It sends when the shower is turned on and automatically start recording the time. And just from that little fact that you're recording the time, we reduce consumption with plus 20%. And this has been documented by Cranfield University and by Surrey University. Furthermore, actually in cooperation with BMA, we are developing a clamp-on sensor for detecting leaky loose. those two things combined with the spillover effect, when people start to think about saving money when they have it, or saving water when they have it in their mindset every day from the Aquadio sitting on the wall, where they are used to watching the time for their showers, they'll automatically reduce waters in other areas. They'll turn off the shower when they use the soap. They'll turn off the water when they brush their teeth, etc., etc. So we think that just by introducing that technology, we can reduce water demand with 15%. On only the showers, we see that we reduce showers with plus 20%, which is equivalent to about 8% of the total consumption.
Thank you, Henrik. And this really kind of reaches the point that behaviour change is absolutely crucial on showering for the obvious reasons that Henrik's explained there, but also on the leaky loos issue, and that we need to kind of drive behaviour change so that people love their loo and conduct that very simple and effective maintenance that's going to keep it working properly. So behaviour change across the piece is crucial on water efficiency, and certainly BMA in our consultation responses hasn't been able to stress that enough. And Andy, from the BMA team, you make a point in the chat. I'm going to bring you in now, if that's okay.
Hi, sorry, struggling with the microphone as everybody else does. Yeah, I mean, it was just to make the point that we do find that just reducing water levels, be very careful with reducing water levels. There are health issues with reducing water levels. System can get contaminated through using less water. So there is a minimum sort of safe level that was proven by USA research in California. And the other thing is that users expect a certain level of performance. So, you know, industry can certainly help with setting or thinking about what those expectations are. We have a lot of experience. We have a lot of members with a lot of experience that can actually input into that. And I realize that this is getting to a granular level, but when you get down to those sort of performance levels, you need to involve us, and research needs to back up what users expect. We know this from just simply the number of calls that I get saying my toilet won't flush. It does, it meets a minimum standard, it's using less water, but they've just taken out a 9-litre toilet, and they're expecting that same amount of water through the system, and it's a different way of working. It's effective, but we need to make sure that we don't overstep that mark.
Thank you, Andy. Either Kate or Rob, would you like to come back at this point?
Yeah, I can come in if you like, Tom. I mean, I think it's probably important for us to say that, you know, we don't sort of just, you know, produce these reports and, you know, let them sit on the shelf. We're really keen to sort of develop this work, and it's really sort of the start. We'll be sort of working with NHCLG and BEI to see how we can maybe try and get sort of the performance side of things incorporated. So we'd be keen to, you know, work with you guys, with your members, about how we can sort of develop this going forward. So always happy to do that. Just coming on back on Henrik's point there on behaviour change. Again, we think that's really important. Some sort of discussion that we had with as part of the work with the sort of behavioural psychologists who do all the sort of nudge stuff indicated that a really crucial time in sort of influencing behaviour change is when people move house. You know, they sort of seem to be more receptive to sort of making behaviour change, maybe when they're making other changes to their properties. So yeah, those things around maybe installing timers on showers and things like that could be a really good opportunity there. And also, I don't know whether that could maybe be incorporated in some of these water efficiency audits that the water companies, I know Thames are running these sorts of things. So maybe we can look at sort of getting sort of those sorts of technology solutions incorporated into those kind of home audits.
Thank you, Rob. Colin makes another great point in the meeting chat around this issue of unintended consequences and the need to ensure that new, more stringent product regulations don't mean that people are simply using their inefficient products for longer. That is exactly the argument that we've been making, Colin, to in the various consultations, that we must avoid unintended consequences at all costs. Jim also raises, in response to Henrik's contribution around digital monitoring, and just need to be careful not to avoid any novelty wearing off effects in that exercise. But I think Rob's partially addressed that in the point around when people are most susceptible to be accepting those nudges in certain direction on their behaviours. Mick has a question. Are the proposals underpinned by case study activity? So, Rob, can we go to you to answer that in respect to the bricks and mortar report, and perhaps Kate to can answer whether case studies have been considered in some of the policy development by the department? Rob first, please.
Sorry, I made the cardinal sin there of not unmuting myself. Shouldn't be doing that at this point in the pandemic, should I? No, sorry. We've tried to sort of bring the bricks and mortar report to life a bit by using a lot of case studies. One that sort of springs to mind really was one of the sponsors of the report was Yorkshire Water. They've been working with Keyland Developments on, I think it was an old sewage treatment works that they've completely redeveloped and tried to put sort of green infrastructure and water efficiency really at the heart of that scheme. So there is there is sort of details and evidence around sort of some of these case studies where this has been put into practice in the report.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. So alongside our consultation, we also ran a call for evidence sort of at the end of it, and we received quite a fair bit of evidence through that. But I also want to reiterate the point, and it sort of links to performance standards as well, and sort of those sort of in-depth discussions that any policies that we're exploring, we're very conscious where there's research gaps, and that we'll need to do a lot of further investigation before sort of making any like huge changes, not so that we're intending to, but we're just very conscious of where more research will be needed, and we've had quite a few discussions sort of already through our processes. But I just want to reassure people that there won't be sort of any sudden changes without the evidence there that supports it.
Kate, thank you very much, and thank you everybody. Unbelievably, we've already used up our hour. It's been an incredibly interesting session. I'd like to thank everyone for participating, and most of all our panelists. Thank you, Kate and Rob, for leading the discussion, and I hope to see many of you back at 11 o'clock for our next session on what the industry can do to reduce waste. That's going to be chaired by my colleague, Andy McLean. Thank you very much, everyone, and see you later this morning.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.